Okay, so we're diving into the IEA's Renewables 2024 report. It's a pretty dense report, but we'll break it down.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
It really gets into all things renewable energy. We're talking electricity, transport, heat, even you name it.
And all the way to 2030.
Exactly. It's like this crystal ball looking into the future of renewables. And for those who don't know, the IEA is kind of a big deal in the energy world. They're the International Energy Agency.
They advise something like 40 countries on their energy policies.
Exactly. So not just some random think tank.
This report is coming out right after COP28, where they set that ambitious goal to triple global renewable capacity by 2030.
Right. A huge goal.
So this report is well-timed. It's like that reality check after setting these big goals. Are we on track? What needs to change?
So looking at the report, are we on track? I mean, it does project significant growth in renewable capacity, like a 2.7 times increase by 2030.
which is huge.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that that actually surpasses what many countries had set as their own targets.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's almost 25% more growth than initially planned for.
Wow, that's really something. But even with this growth rate, we're still not quite hitting that target of tripling capacity. At least not with the policies we have in place right now.
So the report's kind of a wake-up call then.
In a way, yeah. It shows us that setting ambitious targets is important, but it's not enough.
We have to actually implement the policies to make them happen. So where do we even begin?
Well, the report breaks down the different sectors, and it looks at the specific challenges and opportunities in each.
And within all that, solar power seems to be the rock star. I mean, it's projected to make up 80% of new capacity by 2030.
It's huge.
That's massive. And it makes sense when you think about it. Costs are falling, approvals are getting faster.
And the public is more on board with it than ever.
Exactly. It's not this fringe technology anymore. It's becoming mainstream.
And it's not just about those big solar farms anymore either. Distributed solar is really taking off.
Right, like rooftop solar panels.
Exactly. People are becoming energy producers themselves, which is pretty empowering when you think about it.
Especially with energy prices being what they are these days, everyone's looking for ways to save money.
Exactly.
So solar is booming, but what about wind power? The report mentions some setbacks recently,
Yeah, there have been some headwinds for sure.
like supply chain issues, inflation, those kinds of things.
Those have definitely had an impact, but the report actually predicts a rebound for wind power.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and one of the key drivers of that is policy changes. They're making wind projects more attractive to investors.
So they're more bankable.
Exactly, and that's crucial in this economic climate. Investors need to see that stability.
And the numbers reflect that.
They do.
Wind capacity expansion is projected to double between 2024 and 2030.
Yeah, compared to the previous 6 years.
That's a big jump. So we've got solar and wind powering ahead, but then there's hydrogen, or more specifically, hydrogen produced from renewable sources. This kind of surprised me. With all the hype around hydrogen, the report projects it'll only make up 4% of total hydrogen production by 2030.
Yeah, that seems low, right?
It does. Is hydrogen all it's cracked up to be?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And the report really digs into that. And what they found is it's not really a technology issue. It's more about demand.
Oh, interesting.
So even though we're seeing huge increases in the capacity to produce green hydrogen, the market demand just isn't there yet,
So we can produce it, but no one's really buying it.
basically.
That's fascinating. So it's this complex interplay of factors: technology, market forces, policy.
Exactly. It's like a
A
dance.
very intricate dance.
And this dance is happening on a global scale, with each region facing its own unique challenges and opportunities.
Right, like China, for example. They seem to be leading the charge in renewable energy.
They're definitely a major player.
But even they must have hurdles to overcome.
Oh, absolutely. No one's immune to the challenges of this energy transition.
So let's take a closer look at some of these key players, starting with China. They're projected to add a massive amount of renewable capacity by 2030.
Something like 3,207 gigawatts.
That's incredible.
It's more than triple their growth from the previous 6 years.
Wow. So they're clearly exceeding their own government goals. They're embracing solar and wind energy in a big way.
They are. But even with all that progress, China does face some significant hurdles.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest is grid constraints.
Ah, right.
As they add all this renewable energy, especially from variable sources like solar and wind, they need to make sure their grid infrastructure can handle it.
It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Exactly. You need to make sure the system can accommodate that influx of energy.
So they need to supersize their energy grid.
You could say that. It's a common challenge with renewable energy integration.
And it highlights how interconnected all these aspects are, from generation to transmission.
You can't have one without the other.
And speaking of navigating this complex landscape, what about the United States? How are they doing in this renewable energy race?
Well, the U.S. is projected to add a significant amount of renewable capacity as well, nearly 500 gigawatts by 2030.
That's still a lot of clean energy.
It is, and a lot of it is driven by the Inflation Reduction Act.
Right, that's been a game changer.
It has, especially for solar.
But what about wind?
Wind is facing some tougher challenges in the U.S.
Like what?
Well, there are those supply chain bottlenecks we talked about, plus permitting delays or slowing things down.
Ah, yes, the infamous red tape.
And then there's the uncertainty surrounding offshore wind development.
Which has huge potential.
It does, but it also faces economic and logistical hurdles.
So it's a mixed bag for wind in the U.S.
You could say that.
But it seems like those grid connection queues are a universal challenge, not just limited to China.
It's a common theme. We see it in Europe, in India, and many parts of the world.
It really underscores the need for a holistic approach. We can't just focus on generating renewable energy. We need to make sure it can get to where it needs to go.
Exactly.
And speaking of other parts of the world, the report highlights India as a rising star in the renewable energy scene.
Oh, absolutely. India's doing some really impressive things.
Like what kind of things?
Well, for one, they're on track to more than double their renewable energy capacity by 2030.
Wow.
And solar energy is really leading the way there.
Why is that?
Part of it is their competitive auction system. It incentivizes companies to develop and deploy renewable energy projects.
So it's creating a favorable market for renewables.
Exactly. And they're not stopping there. India is also a pioneer in developing hybrid projects.
Hybrid projects.
Yeah, combining solar, winds, and storage.
Oh, interesting.
It helps address the issue of intermittency.
Right, because the sun isn't always shining and the wind isn't always blowing.
Exactly. They're aiming to double their share of variable renewable energy to over 30% by 2030.
That's ambitious.
It is. It'll be interesting to see how they manage the grid integration with that much variable renewable energy.
It's inspiring to see these emerging economies stepping up. They're not just following the lead of developed nations, they're forging their own paths.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're becoming major players in this global energy transformation.
Now, what about Europe? They've been strong advocates for renewable energy for a while now.
They have. And they're continuing to make strides.
So what's their story?
Well, one interesting trend in Europe is the rise of distributed solar.
Right, those rooftop solar panels we talked about?
Exactly. It's being driven by a few things. Favorable policy incentives, for one.
Makes sense.
And also a growing desire among Europeans to take control of their energy production.
So they're becoming more energy independent.
In a way, yes.
That's pretty cool.
But while distributed solar is booming, utility-scale solar and wind projects are facing some hurdles.
Like what?
Permitting processes can be lengthy and complex. And there are some complexities in auction designs that can impact investor confidence.
So it's not all smooth sailing, even in Europe.
Definitely not. Every region has its own set of challenges.
It seems like no one is immune, but what's encouraging is that everyone is actively working on solutions.
That's the important thing.
So far, we've been looking at the big picture. Global trends, regional variations.
The lay of the land.
Exactly. But this report also dives into some of the less discussed but equally crucial aspects of the renewable energy transition,
Oh, absolutely.
like manufacturing finance and our old friend gridlock.
Those are the behind-the-scenes factors that can make or break the success of the whole thing.
They're essential to understanding the complexities.
Definitely.
So let's zoom in on those a bit. Starting with manufacturing. The report talks about a potential shakeup in the renewable energy manufacturing industry.
Particularly in solar.
Right. It mentions that smaller manufacturers might struggle to keep up.
Yeah, they're facing challenges from overcapacity and the need to adapt to new technologies.
It's a tough market to be in.
It is,
Mm.
especially in the solar PV manufacturing sector.
So who are the major players in that sector?
Well, China currently dominates the global market.
Of course.
But we are seeing diversification efforts taking shape in other parts of the world.
Like where?
The U.S. and India are making moves.
What are they doing?
They're implementing industrial policies and trade measures to try to bolster domestic production.
So they're trying to break China's hold on the market.
In a way, yes,
Mm-hmm.
but the challenge for these newer players is cost competitiveness.
Right. China has had a head start.
Exactly. So these new players need to find a way to produce solar panels at a competitive price while also scaling up production to meet the growing demand.
It's a delicate balancing act.
It really is.
And of course, we can't talk about scaling up renewable energy without talking about financing. How's the financial outlook for renewables?
So it's a mixed bag.
How so?
Well, on the one hand, investor enthusiasm for renewable energy is still high.
Which is good.
It is,
As
but there's also a growing sense of caution creeping in.
why is that?
Well, rising interest rates are a factor, and there are concerns about grid integration, which can impact project profitability.
So it's a risk-reward calculation for investors.
Exactly. They're weighing the long-term growth potential against the short-term risks.
It's a tough call.
It can be.
And then there's the issue of gridlocks.
Ah, yes. The infamous grid connection queues.
Those are a major headache for renewable energy developers.
They are. It's essentially a backlog of projects waiting to be connected to the grid.
So all this clean energy is just sitting there waiting.
Essentially, yes. And those delays can be costly, both in terms of time and money,
It can really impact project economics.
and investor confidence.
So what can be done about it?
Well, the report does highlight some positive developments.
Oh, good.
Some countries are implementing grid connection reforms.
What kind of reforms?
Things like streamlining the application process,
Mhm.
upgrading grid infrastructure,
Mhm.
and creating more transparent and efficient connection procedures.
So there's hope for improvement.
There is. It's not an insurmountable challenge.
That's good to hear, because a strong and flexible grid is essential for a successful transition to a renewable-powered future.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of ground here. Solar, wind, hydrogen, regional dynamics, manufacturing, finance, grid infrastructure.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But the IEA report doesn't stop there. It also looks at the role of renewable fuels.
Oh, right, like biofuels and RNG.
Exactly. They play a critical role in decarbonizing sectors where electrification is more difficult.
That's an important point. While electric vehicles are gaining momentum, biofuels and RNG offer a more immediate pathway to decarbonization for sectors like heavy-duty transport and aviation.
Right, because battery technology isn't quite there yet for those sectors.
Exactly. Biofuels and RNG act as a bridge.
Allowing us to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels in the meantime.
Precisely.
And the report actually projects that global biofuel demand will surge by nearly 20% by 2030.
Wow, that's significant.
It is. And it's being driven by their increasing use in aviation and marine transport, which, as you said, are harder to electrify. But what's interesting is that this growth isn't uniform across the board.
What do you mean?
Well, we see regional variations in biofuel use.
Ah, I see.
It's influenced by things like the pace of electric vehicle adoption.
And the availability of alternative fuels.
Right, so it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Exactly.
For example, the report projects a slight decline in road transport biofuel demand in the US and Europe.
Because of the rapid adoption of electric vehicles in those regions.
Right, but in other parts of the world like Brazil and Indonesia, where electric vehicle adoption is still in its early stages, we see continued growth in biofuel use for road transport.
It shows how the energy transition is context dependent.
It's about finding the right mix of solutions for each region.
Absolutely, yeah.
And speaking of finding the right mix, the report highlights California's innovative approach to RNG.
California is always at the forefront of clean energy.
They're like the pioneers.
They really are.
They have policies in place that incentivize the use of RNG in various sectors.
Like the low carbon fuel standard and the renewable gas standard.
Right. But what's really interesting is that they're not just promoting its use, they're also planning for a future where its role might evolve.
What do you mean?
Well, the report mentions their plans to shift RNG use away from the transportation sector as electrification progresses,
Oh, interesting.
and redirect it to other sectors like heating.
Where it can still play a valuable role in decarbonization.
Exactly.
That's really forward thinking of them.
It is. It's like they're playing energy chess, anticipating future moves and positioning their pieces strategically.
It's a great analogy.
It highlights how renewable energy planning isn't just about what's happening today, but about anticipating and adapting to the changes that lie ahead.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive rather than reactive.
Exactly. And as we've been diving into this IEA report, it struck me just how multifaceted this renewable energy transition really is.
It's incredibly complex.
It's like a giant puzzle,
with each region holding its own unique pieces
and the challenge is fitting them all together.
to create a sustainable energy future for everyone.
Exactly.
And that's what this report does so well. It provides a comprehensive view of this global puzzle, highlighting both the advancements and the challenges.
It doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
It doesn't sugarcoat anything,
It acknowledges the speed bumps and detours.
but it also provides a roadmap,
showing us the pathways, the innovations, the policy decisions that are driving us forward,
It's a valuable resource for anyone who wants to understand the future of energy.
which should be all of us.
Absolutely.
This isn't just about abstract concepts, it's about the very real energy choices we make every day.
The cars we drive,
Yeah.
the homes we live in, the electricity we consume.
And the more informed we are about renewable energy, the better equipped we'll be to make responsible and sustainable choices.
Knowledge is power. And understanding the nuances of the renewable energy landscape empowers us to become active participants in shaping our energy future.
Well said. This deep dive into the IEA's Renewables 2024 report has been an eye-opening experience.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It's clear that this global energy transformation requires collaboration, innovation, and a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort.
And as we navigate this complex and ever-evolving landscape, we need to remember that it's not just about mitigating the risks of climate change. It's also about unlocking the opportunities that come with a cleaner, more sustainable, and more equitable energy system.
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note of cautious optimism and a shared vision for a brighter energy future, we've reached the end of our deep dive.
Until next time.
Thanks for joining us. It's like they need a supersized energy grid to accommodate all that renewable power. It really highlights how interconnected all these aspects of the energy transition are from generation to transmission. You can't have one without the other. Speaking of navigating this complex landscape, what's the situation in the United States?
Well, the U.S. is projected to add nearly 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030, primarily from, you guessed it, solar and wind. A major driving force behind this is the Inflation Reduction Act, which has been a game changer, especially for the solar industry. However, the wind industry in the U.S. is facing some persistent challenges from those supply chain bottlenecks we touched on earlier to permitting delays that are slowing down projects. And then there's the uncertainty surrounding offshore wind development, which has huge potential, but also faces economic and logistical hurdles.
It seems like those grid connection queues and the need for grid infrastructure upgrades are universal challenges, not just limited to China. It really underscores the importance of a holistic approach to the energy transition. We can't just focus on generating renewable energy. We need to make sure it can be delivered efficiently and reliably to where it's needed. Shifting gears a bit, the report also highlights India as a rising star in the renewable energy arena, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. India's renewable energy journey is truly remarkable. They're on track to more than double their renewable energy capacity by 2030, with solar energy leading the way. A key driver of this growth is their competitive auction system, which incentivizes companies to develop and deploy renewable energy projects. And they're not stopping there. India is also a pioneer in developing hybrid projects that combine solar, wind, and storage, addressing the critical issue of intermittency, making sure the lights stay on even when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing. They've set their sights high, aiming to double their share of variable renewable energy to over 30% by 2030. That's a bold target, and it'll be interesting to see how they navigate the complexities of integrating such a high proportion of variable renewals into their grid.
I think it's incredibly inspiring to see these emerging economies stepping up and becoming major players in the global shift towards renewables. They're not just following the lead of developed nations, they're forging their own paths and contributing significantly to this global energy transformation. What about Europe? They've been strong advocates for renewable energy. How are they keeping pace with these global trends?
Europe presents a fascinating case study. They're experiencing a surge in what we call distributed solar, which, as we discussed earlier, refers to rooftop solar panels and smaller scale installations. This trend is driven in part by favorable policy incentives and also by a growing desire among Europeans to take control of their energy production, reducing their reliance on traditional utilities. However, while distributed solar is booming, utility-scale, solar and wind projects in Europe face their own set of hurdles. Lengthy permitting processes can make it challenging to get these larger projects off the ground, and complexities in auction designs can impact investor confidence. So it's a mixed bag even in a region with a strong commitment to renewable energy.
It seems that no region is immune to the challenges of this energy transition. But what's encouraging is that they're all actively grappling with these issues and finding solutions tailored to their unique circumstances. Up to this point, we focused on the big picture, the global trends and regional variations. But this report goes deeper, delving into some of the less discussed but equally crucial aspects of the renewable energy transition, such as manufacturing finance and, of course, our old friend gridlock. Let's zoom in on these behind-the-scenes factors that are essential to understanding the complexities of this transition.
You're right, these behind-the-scenes factors can often make or break the success of the entire endeavor. The report, for instance, points out the potential for a shakeup in the renewable energy manufacturing industry, particularly in solar.
It mentions that smaller manufacturers might struggle to keep up in this rapidly evolving market, facing challenges from overcapacity and the need to adapt to new technologies. It sounds like a classic case of survival of the fittest in a rapidly growing and evolving industry.
It's exactly. This is especially true in the solar PV manufacturing sector. While China currently dominates the global market, we're seeing diversification efforts taking shape in other parts of the world, particularly in the US and India, fueled by industrial policies and trade measures aimed at bolstering domestic production. The key challenge for these newer players is to achieve cost competitiveness with established manufacturers while scaling up production to meet the surging global demand for solar panels. It's a delicate balancing act.
It sounds like a high stakes race, and not everyone is starting from the same position. And of course, we can't talk about scaling up renewable energy without talking about the financial side of the equation. The report seems to paint a mixed picture on that front.
It does. While investor enthusiasm for renewable energy remains high, there's a growing sense of caution creeping in, driven by factors like rising interest rates and concerns about grid integration, which can impact project profitability. It's a balancing act for investors weighing the long-term growth potential of the renewable energy sector against these short-term risks and uncertainties. Adding another layer of complexity to this financial equation is the issue of gridlock.
You're telling me the report talks about those infamous grid connection queues, essentially a backlog of renewable energy projects waiting to be connected to the grid. It's like a traffic jam of clean energy waiting to be unleashed, and that delay can have a significant impact on project economics and investor confidence.
You've hit the nail on the head. Grid connection queues are a major obstacle in many regions, affecting project timelines and driving up costs. But there's a glimmer of hope amidst this gridlock challenge. The report highlights some positive developments in the form of grid connection reforms being implemented in various countries. These reforms aim to streamline the application process, upgrade grid infrastructure, and create more transparent and efficient connection procedures. So while challenges remain, it's not all doom and gloom on the gridlock front.
It's encouraging to hear that concrete steps are being taken to address these bottlenecks because a robust and flexible grid is the backbone of a successful transition to a renewable powered future. We've covered a lot of ground here: solar, wind, hydrogen, regional dynamics, and the often overlooked aspects of manufacturing finance and grid infrastructure. But it's fascinating. While all this is happening in the realm of electricity generation, the report doesn't stop there. It also shines a light on the critical role of renewable fuels, particularly biofuels and RNG, or renewable natural gas, in decarbonizing sectors where electrification is proving to be more difficult.
That's a really important point to bring up. While the electrification of transportation is gaining significant momentum, especially with the rise of electric vehicles, biofuels and RNG offer a more immediate pathway to decarbonization for sectors like heavy-duty transport and aviation, where battery technology isn't quite there yet. These renewable fuels act as a bridge, allowing us to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels in sectors where electrification is still a more distant horizon.
The report actually mentions that global biofuel demand is expected to surge by nearly 20% by 2030, driven by their increasing use in aviation and marine transport, which, as you said, are more challenging to electrify. But what's intriguing is that this growth isn't uniform across the board. We see regional variations in biofuel use influenced by factors like the pace of electric vehicle adoption and the availability of alternative fuels.
You're right, it's a dynamic landscape. For instance, the report projects a slight decline in road transport biofuel demand in the US and Europe, largely due to the rapid adoption of electric vehicles in those regions. However, in other parts of the world, such as Brazil and Indonesia, where electric vehicle adoption is still in its early stages and biofuel production is significant, we see continued growth in biofuel use for road transport. This highlights how the energy transition is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about finding the right mix of solutions that work within specific regional contexts.
It's about embracing diversity, both in terms of renewable energy sources and the pathways we take to achieve our decarbonization goals. And speaking of diverse pathways, California, always a pioneer in clean energy, is highlighted in the report for its innovative approach to RNG. They have policies in place like the Low Carbon Fuel Standard and the Renewable Gas Standard, which incentivize the use of RNG in various sectors.
California's approach to RNG is truly forward-thinking. They're not just promoting its use, they're actively planning for a future where its role might evolve. The report mentions their plans to shift RNG use away from the transportation sector as electrification progresses, redirecting it to other sectors like heating, where it can play a valuable role in decarbonization. This kind of strategic flexibility, recognizing that different renewable fuels might have different strengths at different stages of the energy transition, is crucial for a successful and adaptable energy transition.
It's like they're playing energy chess, anticipating future moves, and positioning their pieces strategically. It's a fascinating example of how renewable energy planning isn't just about what's happening today, but about anticipating and adapting to the changes that lie ahead. You know, as we've been diving into this IEA report, it struck me just how multifaceted this renewable energy transition really is.
It really is.
It's a global puzzle, with each region holding its own unique pieces, and the challenge lies in fitting them together to create a sustainable energy future.
That's a great way to put it. And what this report does so well is to provide us with a comprehensive view of this global puzzle, highlighting not only the exciting advancements in renewable energy technologies, but also the often overlooked challenges and complexities that come with integrating these technologies into our existing energy systems. It doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
Exactly. It doesn't sugarcoat anything. It acknowledges that there are speed bumps and detours on this road to a renewable power future, but it also provides a roadmap highlighting the pathways, the innovations, and the policy decisions that are driving us towards that ultimate destination.
And that's what makes this report such a valuable resource for anyone who wants to understand where we stand today in this energy transition and what the future might hold. It's a must-read for policymakers, industry leaders, investors, and really anyone who's curious about the future of energy, which, let's be honest, should be all of us. After all, the choices we make today will determine the kind of energy future we create for ourselves and for generations to come.
Absolutely. This isn't just about abstract concepts or far-off scenarios. It's about the very real energy choices we make every day, the cars we drive, the homes we live in, the electricity we consume. And the more informed we are about the potential of renewable energy and the complexities of this transition, the better equipped we'll be to make responsible and sustainable choices.
I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, and understanding the nuances of the renewable energy landscape empowers us to become active participants in shaping a more sustainable energy future, not just passive bystanders. Whether it's advocating for policy changes, making informed decisions about our own energy consumption, or simply spreading awareness about the potential of renewable energy, every action counts.
Well said. This deep dive into the IEA's Renewables 2024 report has been an incredible journey, shedding light on the remarkable progress we've made in renewable energy, while also acknowledging the challenges that lie ahead. It's clear that a global energy transformation of this magnitude requires collaboration, innovation, and a willingness to embrace new ways of thinking about energy.
Absolutely. It's a collective effort that demands the participation of governments, businesses, communities, and individuals alike. And as we navigate this complex and ever-evolving landscape, it's crucial to remember that the transition to a renewable-powered future isn't just about mitigating the risks of climate change, as critical as that is, but also about unlocking the vast opportunities that come with a cleaner, more sustainable, and ultimately more equitable energy system.
And on that note of cautious optimism and a shared vision for a brighter energy future, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thank you for joining us on this insightful journey through the world of renewable energy. We hope you found it as engaging and thought-provoking as we have.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. The future of energy is in our hands.
And we can't wait to see what we create together.